Greetings, 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 greetings. It is I, King Clifford Jefferson. I send as Godfrey, the fifth counterman Jew, son of folk, ruler of Jerusalem. I'm the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, which we know as Jesus Christ, or the King of Peace, or Melchizedek, known as the King of Righteousness. It is April the 7th, 2025, which is equivalent to the birth year 2975. I greet you in the name of my Queen Sister Galveston from the House of Galveston. I greet you in the name of Archbishop Belmont from the House of Belmont. I greet you in the name of all the officers and members and staff, as well as all those who are trying to get understanding of what it is that we are trying to do. I greet you in the name of the predecessors, our successors, our heirs, our children, our mothers, our fathers, all those who are in this present day need those chains breaking, which we call through the process of freedom. Okay? So this is very important in regards to today's lesson, which is called the new classification in America. Are you on the list? The new classification of America. And in this classification, based upon this data that they're collecting, pursuant to the demographics concerning ancestry, you need to make sure that you're on this list. And just because you're on this list doesn't mean that you have a right to the benefits, protection, rights, and things of that nature that are given to those who qualify under the requirements based upon the data collected pursuant to demographics. Okay? Because demographics denotes to the society and people based upon the writing and graphs and whatever record that they use to record society. And as I always say, he who writes your books sets your timeline. Time never was when we were not. If the life of time become and begin, the time will come when we will be no more. Okay? So this lesson is called the new classification in America. Are you on this list? This particular classification has to do with Minna, Middle Eastern and North African ancestry. Okay? Middle Eastern and Northern and North Africa ancestry, based upon the two types of statuses, just soil and just sanguineous. Once again, just soil and just sanguineous. This must be looked at in regards to the equation that we all must solve in regards to the data information that they are collecting based upon the demographics here. It is based upon just soil and just sanguineous. Okay? Hold that thought. Everyone's here on the platform. Uh, need to make themselves known so I'll be able to communicate whoever's here today. If you don't mind, it's not a demand. You can stay mute if you want to. But I like to know who is viewing me and who am I communicating with. All right, unless I'm just talking to myself. All right, so I'll be with you in 1 second. I am thankful for those who are here today. That means you too. who are watching, as well as all those who might be joining us momentarily. But this information is in dire need. Okay, in order to break these chains, okay, in order to break these chains. Because here in America, everybody's in this modern day are enslaved, i.e., chattel property, i.e., you are considered real estate, okay? Whereas movable or non-movable, you still are considered property, which denotes to real estate. In New Jersey, property is governed under Title 46 of the revised statute. I don't know what it is in any other state within the union, but it's governed under Title 46. All right? Very important. We are, in fact, in a competition, a survival of the fittest. Wherever demographics you come from, the survival of the fittest or the arena where the games are being played in this hemisphere is called the Anglosphere. Okay? So you're in the competition with everyone that's recorded based upon the data collected that's associated what we call demographics. Okay? Demographics. So let's look at that word real quick because we overlook it. It all involves MENA. Okay? It all involves the conversation that we're going to have today in regards to MENA, the new classification in America. Are you on that list? And if you are on that list, what privileges that you have, or and what amenities do you have, or are you going to even be included based upon the demographic information that is recorded? Because based upon that which has already been recorded, based upon the prior uh, census data collected as Negroes, colors, and Black people for a group, based upon the writings, the drawings, and description. We never received anything yet, okay? But we was on that list, all right? But now the list is being updated, all right? So I'm gonna give you my point of view. I'm gonna give you other people's point of view based upon their understanding of the new classification of the group or society that now is going to be accounted based upon the requirements set forth by the federal government. All right? So it's very important to pay attention. Demography means people, society, and graphia means writing, drawing, or description. It's a statistical study of human populations, their size, composition, ethnic group, age, and how they change through their interplay of fertility, birth, mortality, death, and migration. All right? So this involves just sanguineous and just soil arguments. Okay? Just sanguineous and just soil arguments between those who are being born on the soil by way of your being there for a particular period in time, or you immigrated and then you went through a process to now be associated with some type of rights and protections on that soil. Okay? But that type of citizenship involves just soil versus the former, which involves just sanguineous, meaning blood. So demography involving the people and the study done on the people that are broken down to different ethnic groups, all right? Demographic analysis examines the measure, the dimensions, and dynamics of the population. It can cover whole societies or groups defined by criteria such as education, nationality, religion, and ethnicity. So if there's no analysis done based upon the demographics of one particular group, then that means that that group does not exist. Okay? Very important. Competition. So let's look at that. Demography. Let's define it so that you all can see it for yourself. You got to show receipts. You know, when I do a topic, I stay on that topic for a while. If there are any questions by the viewers, please, by all means, post them in the chat. Demography, demos means people or society, and we're talking about societies over here. So if you're one of the people in society, then you must be counted amongst the census. And based upon the data collected in the prior censuses, based upon the categories that were selected, um, we were at the bottom of the list. Okay, we were at the bottom of the list, even if we were if the list said that we were second to the bottom, based upon what we see in society, that list is still wrong because we're at the bottom. The being second from the bottom, those who were at the bottom, they're now in a position where they're over us. Okay, so we're definitely in a state of hellishness. So demography means people or society, and graphia means writing, drawing, or description, which is statistical study of human population, their size, composition, ethnic group, age, and how they change through the interplay of fertility, birth, mortality, death, and migration. This involves the understanding of just soil and just sanguineous. Demographic, which is the analysis, which is based upon the information collected, all right, based upon the demographics, not just over there in North America, North Africa, Asia, uh, Arabia, Spain, Great Britain, what it's called today. We're talking about as well as over here, all right, under the different identities in which it was known as, all right, prior to what it's being called today. So that, and it also involves a demographic analysis examining and measuring the dimensions and dynamics of the population. It can cover a whole societies of groups defined by the criteria such as education, nationality, religion, and ethnicity. So if you don't have the education about your nationality or the education about your religion or education about your ethnicity, then you pretty much don't know anything about yourself. And the whole thing is knowing thyself. So, in that in mind, you are in fact in the competition here in North America. I talked about this yesterday, dealing with the Fair Credit Reporting Agency and where that stems from. And competition law is the field of law. We talking about law, brothers and sisters. Law. The only way remedy is going to come in a concrete form, i.e., where you can visibly see it, is through application of the law. Not just religion by itself, but laws of implementing or protecting the concept of religion, which the First Amendment protects. Okay? So competition law is a field of law that promotes or seeks to maintain market competition along with everybody else by regulating anti-competitive conduct by companies. Competitive law is implemented through public and private enforcement. It is also known as antitrust law or just antitrust, meaning that anyone that was not associated with that original trust, the agreement of the trust, the parties of the trust, by operation of law are in violation, which means it's violation of antitrust law. Okay. no matter what form it exists in, you're in violation of the law, which is called anti-monopoly laws, because most of these competition are based upon businesses, okay? And businesses operate based upon trade and commerce, okay? Trade and commerce, which is governed by banking, okay? It's governed by banking. So all this is governed under Title 12 of the United States Code and Title 15 of the United States Code, which we already talked about, okay? We must understand, all right? Now we're going to go back, we're going to go down to the history just to get a brief so I can move on with my lesson. History. We don't want to start in Roman time because we understand we are subject to Roman law. But if it started in Roman, we definitely need to get out or break the yokes or the chains of Rome. Okay, that's what it's always been about. Okay, but we're not. We're going. We're coming back. We're going back into a time of era where it's most prevalent because there were laws that were already there and in place to support our argument. Okay, prior to the Declaration of Independence by the so-called founding fathers. But at this time, the geographical location of it was the eastern, middle and northern part of what we call North America. Very important. It says legislation in England to control monopolies and restrictive practices was enforced well before the Norman conquest. When we say Norman conquest, we're talking about the time with William the Conqueror, okay, invaded England. And this was or considered to be your first English renowned king. All right. The Doomsday Book recorded that forestalling the practice of buying up goods before the before they reached market and then inflating the prices was one of the three forfeitures that one of the Wessex kings, King Edward the Confessor, could carry out through England. So this is going all the way back to the kings of Wessex. But concerns for fair prices also led to the attempts to directly regulate the markets. Better yet, the kings of England. Just keep it there, plain and simple. These are the kings of England. These are not the kings of Scotland. These are not the kings of Ireland. These are not the kings of Spain. These are not the kings of France. These are not the German kings. They are not Muslim kings. They are not Egyptian kings. They are not Israelite kings. These are English kings. And prior to 1066, they should be called Berber kings because the only calendar that exists, along with every other calendar prior to the English, was the Berber calendar, which we identify with. The year is 2025 for you, and the Berber calendar, the year is 2947, okay, which is the equivalent year for us. So it continues to say that under Henry III, okay, which is descendant of Edward the Confessor by way of the English authority coming under the Plantagenet crown by way of Empress Matilda being married to Godfrey V, Count of Anjou, son of Fulk, ruler of Jerusalem. And his children, Henry II, gave birth to John, and John's son was Henry II, who gave birth to Edward I, Edward II, and Edward III, which were the laws that were passed down to the so-called founding fathers, as well as because it would pass down to the House of Tudors, to the House of Stuart, as well as to the founding fathers at that time that were called colonies. Okay, so it says that Henry III, an act was passed in 1266 to fix bread and ale prices in correspondence with grain prices laid down by the Assize Courts. Okay, it's the Assize Act, 1195, Assize Courts. Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Size courts, yes. Penalties for breach including amerciaments, pillory, and tumbrel. These are terms we need to identify and understand. A 14th century statute labeled forestallers as oppressors of the poor. Remember, the poor is based upon your credit. Okay, if you're a debtor, you are poor, meaning you are a sinner. If you have credit, that means you're a debtor in a better position than the ones who don't have credit as a result of default. Okay, very important to understand those terms versus you being a creditor by way of you're having the right to extend whatever it is that's rightfully yours. Okay, must understand. And at this time, these kings of England controlled everything. A 14th century statute labeled forestallers as oppressors of the poor and communities at large and enemies of the whole country. Under King Edward III, the Statute of Laborers of 1349 fixed wages of artificers and workmen and decreed that foodstuffs should be sold at reasonable prices. On top of these existing penalties, the statute stated that overcharging merchants must pay the injured party double the sum to discard treble damages he received, an idea that has been replicated in punitive treble damages under what? United States antitrust law. Also under Edward III, the following statutory provisions outlaw trade combination. Okay, so this is the foundation of why these trade wars exist, because the ones who are doing trade are not the ones who are the ones considered the original creditors. Okay, very important to understand where I'm going with this. All right, in regards to MENA. Okay, because these people that we're talking about right now are considered those people who are classified as Middle Eastern and North Africa. Okay, Middle Eastern and North African descendants. This is us. Okay, the Anglo-Saxon Berbers, or the English Berbers, or just Berbers that speak English, because the English word for the word Berber is Berber. Okay, very important. Let's get into it. One more thing we need to look at: prescription of sovereignty. Prescription of sovereignty transfer. Okay? This is what your present government has done to you. Those that preceded that government, such as your colonies, they inherited from the House of Stuarts, which in this particular country, it was under the House of Stuarts, under the monarch of Queen Anne. She was a domestic monarch here in England versus, I mean, pardon myself, she was a foreign monarch here in the Kingdom of England, because the crown of England was here in 1702 and the authority of the crown was indefinite. So her being descended from the House of Stuart, she was considered a domestic, a foreign monarch. Okay, King James I on down to her and everyone who inherited from her were considered foreign monarchs. This country did not honor foreign monarchs. They honored domestic monarchs. The statute governing property honored a domestic monarch, and the monarch here domestically was apparently the King of England. And if New Jersey was under the authority of the Crown, called His Majesty's Provincial Council, and was its authority at that time was indefinite. And at that time, there were separate realms and separate governments and separate monarchs under England, Ireland, and Scotland. And we can see in New Jersey, the actual government or the seat of the government was actually here. That means that it was a domestic monarch being overseen by a foreign monarch, such as Queen Anne back in 1702. So we must know the difference between a domestic monarch and a foreign monarch. I'm not a foreign monarch. I am a domestic monarch because I was born on the soil and I am of the blood by way of hereditary inheritance. Okay? Inheritance by way of blood. That's just sanguineous, okay, versus just soil, which we're going to define. So prescription is an international law, is sovereignty transfer of a territorial real estate by open encroachment by a new sovereign upon the territory for a prolonged period of time, acting as the sovereign without protest or other contest by the original sovereign. This is called your representative. Okay? This is called Prince Patriarch, father of the nation. Okay? The one who speaks on your behalf. The one who speaks on behalf the heirs of all heirs all descendants, whether those who have existed, those who exist now, and those who will come to exist. Okay, that's why the tenure was remained indefinite. Okay, the crown remained indefinite. We must understand these terms to understand this lesson, because if you don't understand it, then you will be subject to the same type of identity based upon the data they collected in regards to your ancestry that lived in Middle East or North African territory, which we do know our ancestors came from Northeast and Middle East Africa. Okay? Very important. Before the Arabs got there. Okay? So it says that without protest or other contest by the original sovereign. It is analogous, my brothers and sisters. It is analogous to the common law doctrine of easement by prescription, by private real estate. Once again, it is synonymous and analogous, denotes to, or assimilated to the common law doctrine. We know when we say the common law, we're talking about presidents, which we talk about in a second, which is the common law of England, which was adopted by all the states under what they call the doctrine of easement by prescription. So prescription of sovereignty is also called easement by prescription for private real estate. What is easement by prescription? A lot of you don't know that definition. Let's look at it, because this is the position you're in as a result of credit. Okay? When someone gives you credit, it makes you a debtor to the creditor because it wasn't yours from the door. Okay? So prescription of sovereignty is here, it's called easement by prescription. And easement by prescription is called, let's look at it in its true definition. An easement is a non-possessory. What does non-possessory mean? A non-possessory interest in land is a term of property law to describe any of the categories of a right held by one person to use land that is in the possession of another. This is the purpose. This is the purpose for the creation of the county recordings office. This is the reason for the creation of the county recording office, to record property that is in your possession that belongs to another. Who does it belong to? The sovereign or the heirs who are descendants of the sovereign, according to the common law. Okay? According to the common law. This is very important, and you must understand this. All right? So prescription of sovereignty transfer deals with easement by prescription, which is a non-possessory right to use something that you don't own. Okay, something that you don't own, and this can be done by several ways. One is by adverse possession, and the other is by right, what we call right of way. Okay, squatter rights. These are some of the ways that property can be taken, okay? Subject to what we call the statutes of limitation. So if the owner don't come back at a particular time, then he has defaulted on his right to have the right of reversion or remandering of that estate back to him or his heirs or his descendants. Very, very important. This is why it brings up to the legal maxim, nullum tempus occurret rege. Okay? It brings us here. Greetings, Brother McGowan from the House McGowan. Nullum tempus occurret rege. Nullum tempus occurret rege means no time runs against the king. Also abbreviated to nullum tempus, which is the common law doctrine, which they amended or recreated and excluded occurret rege, meaning the king. Okay, they took that out. You know what I'm saying? So, but under nullius tempus occurred reggae, when the king is there, there's no such thing as a statute of limitation or latches, which means the doctrine of latches, and wish to bring a claim for the reversion or remandering of an estate, which was created by what we call the common recovery practice, okay? Which you call fee simple versus entail, all right? Very important. Why do I say this? All right. Listen to what the scholars say. Let's listen to what the scholars say about this lesson, which is called the new classification now in America called MENA. There's other classifications, but they're only arguing about one group of classification which everybody is trying to classify as Middle Eastern and North African. So let's look at those groups as recorded. One second. Let me just pull up the legislation. Okay? Let me just pull up the legislation first. I'm going straight sources, undisputable sources. That's right here. Right? Present statute. This was this was just enacted by the state legislation. Okay? Very important. And this is the talk. This everybody's talking about this, okay? On a large scale, everyone is talking about this, but we're not talking about it. We're not talking about it. How come? We're talking about New Jersey. Okay, New Jersey in 1702 to 1776 was His Majesty's crown, and the crown that was under His Majesty was under the crown of England. Okay, very important. That's a domestic monarch. Okay, not a foreign monarch, because a foreign monarch would be a monarch such as the House of Stuart. Okay, you have a domestic and a foreign monarch. A domestic monarch goes by the laws of the government, which apparently here is the common law of England. So apparently we know that monarch must have been a domestic monarch. Okay? Very important to make that connection. Senate number 2415, State of New Jersey Legislature, 2019 Legislature, introduced May 9th, 2022. Okay? 2022. Synopsis of this legislation requires state agencies to update demographic data collection methods on Asians, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Middle East and North Africa, South Asian, and Indian diaspora residents of this state, specifically New Jersey. Okay? So we're talking about Asians, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Middle Eastern, North Africa, and Southern Asians and Indian of diaspora residents. Okay, and we're talking about two groups of society under two different categories: just soil and just sanguineous. Once again, just soil and just sanguineous. What is just soil and what is just sanguineous? Let's look at that before we move forward. Because just because you're on this list don't mean you should be on that list. Okay? In regards to the right to inhabit the rights of the citizen versus the residents. Because just because you're a resident don't mean you're a citizen. You need proof of that. And a driver license is not going to do it. Okay? A passport is not going to do it. Okay? Or any other instrument that they create for you is not going to do it. Because it only gives you or proves as and serves as identity. Okay? Identity. It doesn't prove who you are. Okay? Of course, to how they identify you based upon the instrument that identify you. Just soil, meaning right of soil, is the right of anyone born in the territory of a state to nationality or citizenship. Just soil was part of the English common law in contrast to just sanguineous rights of blood associated with French Civil Code of 1803. So once again, just soil deals with the right of anyone born in a territory or a state, meaning that they didn't care who your mother and father was. If it's born on the territory, you had the right to citizenship versus just sanguineous that had to do with the right of blood, which is associated with parents, mother or father, which denotes to what we call ancestry. The data collection of demographics associated with ancestry of where your people come from. Okay? Very important. Just sanguineous. Just sanguineous, meaning right of blood, is a principle of nationality law by which nationality is determined or acquired by nationality of one or both parents. Children at birth may be nationals of a particular state if either or both of their parents have nationalities of that state. It may also apply to national identities of ethnic, cultural, or other origins, meaning that you have a nation that you or your ancestors have come from, which you carry on. You can't throw off the mother country. This is why they have what they call embassies for protection of those foreign nationals, okay, of those foreign citizens, not foreign residents, okay, unless you're an employee. If you're just a foreign resident, unregistered, you don't have that protection. Citizens can also apply to children whose parents belong to a diaspora, as as stated in those groups, and were not themselves of the state conferring citizenship, meaning that this becomes what we call uh, a diversity issue. The principal's contrast was just for a right of soul, which is solely based on a place of birth. I hope everyone understands the difference. The 5 people who are watching, that is very important that you understand the difference between just soil and just sanguineous. Right of blood and right of, which goes back to your mother or father, and right uh, of just being born on the soil that does not involve your mother and father. Father, okay, very important. All right, so that brings us here. Brings us here. We talked about this yesterday. Well, I got to stay on this topic because it should be it's alarming. This is an alarming conversation that everyone should be having based upon what's coming down the pipe. Okay, Title 52. Okay, we understand New Jersey state government is governed under Title 52 under the New Jersey Revised Statute 52 colon 2-1. Okay, which is a provisionary and temporary government, which is only a government that is in place because of a collapse of the original government. Okay, it clearly shows you that each state agency that directly or by contract collects demographic data as to the ancestry of residents. It didn't say citizens. Of residents of the state of New Jersey should use separate collection categories and tabulations for the following. Okay? So everyone who watch this lesson or going to be watching this lesson or should be watching this lesson need to pick a category out of the 5 categories. Okay? Because every state within the United States is going to be collecting data information based upon the behavioral patterns of those people in society. And this will determine how much assistance that you get in society if you're on this group, on this list. Okay? So this information should remain open for the public to examine. Okay, not just the public, the lawmakers, the stakeholders, and everybody else who have an interest in making it uh uh the making it beneficial for all those who are domiciled here, whether it's by right to be here or by way of immigration, peacefully. Okay, to make sure that their stay is like you going to a resort. Okay, but some people don't have that luxury. Okay, and that luxury is now about to stop if you didn't inherit it. You didn't inherit it. Okay, so it said each state agency that directly or by contract collects demographic, and we know what the word demographics means, and we know data means that which is collected as to the ancestry of the residents of the state of New Jersey. You shall use separate collection categories and tabulation for the following. So every resident that watching this video have in their pocket right now a driving license. You heard of the Real ID Act, right? And on that ID, in lieu of the Real ID Act, clearly says on the face of it that is not proof of citizenship. This is in New Jersey under New Jersey Revised Statute Title 36, colon 3-29.3. Once again, New Jersey Revised Statute 36, colon 29-3.29, which deals with the instrument known as a driving license or just the instrument that identifies you, okay, based upon residency, okay? And everyone in these classifications, out of 1 through 5, have, if you're in New Jersey, a driving license, okay? A driving license. One, the first group, each major Asian group, including but not limited to Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Vietnamese, Asians, Indians, Laotian, Cambodian, Bangladesh, Hmong, Indonesian, Malaysian, Pakistani, Sri Lanka, Taiwanese, if I pronounce it wrong, please forgive me, Nepalese, Burmese, Tibetan, and Thai. Okay? That's one classification. That's data information based upon demographics that's collected. They're going to know who's who. Okay? They're going to know who's who. They're going to know where you come from, where your mother country from. Do you have the right to be here? Because it has all to do with deportation, i.e., anti-immigration. Okay? Very important. 2, each major Pacific Islander group, including but not limited to Native Hawaiians, Chamorro, Guamanian, Samoan, Fijian, and Tongan. Okay? Very important. Do you fit in that group? Eastern major, East major, Middle Eastern, and North African group, including but not limited to Algerian, Bahraini, Egyptian, Jordan, Kuwaiti, Lebanese, Libyan, Moroccan, Omani, and Tunisian. All these societies and all these nationalities are trying to classify under the data collection here in New Jersey as Middle Eastern and Northern Africa, Northern African. Okay, all these groups. Okay, under these new names. Then you got 4, East Major South Asian and Indian diaspora group, including but not limited to Guyanese, Trinidadian, and Tobagonian, and Surinamese. And 5, other Asian Pacific Islanders, South Asians, and Indian diasporas, or Middle Eastern and North African groups. This is very important, especially for the topic concerning those who are residents or who are citizens of New Jersey. Okay? Very important. Because it says in B, each state agency that directly or by contract collects demographic data as to the ancestry of residents of the state of New Jersey should use separate collection categories. So that means that we are not going to be counted together in tabulations for the following: the primary language spoken at home, and if such language is non-English language, whether the respondent is fluent in English. This the word respondent. That's a legal word used in civil litigation. The word respondent. Okay? Respondent is usually a word used in appellate court. All right, which denotes to in the civil action a defendant. Okay? Word versus appellant or appellee, which is known in a civil case as a plaintiff. All right. Two, ancestry. Very important because we just defined just soil and just sanguineous. Just soil is just being born on the soil, meaning that you can immigrate here and have children born on the soil, but the birthright inheritance is still the same of you immigrating here and being born on the soil. That's just soil, meaning that you have to go through a naturalization process. If you don't have not gone through that process, that means that you are here illegally versus those who are not just born on the soil, but are here by way of blood, meaning that there's no requirement that you need to meet or need to measure up to. All right? We all need to understand what it is that the legislative is saying. Because it said the data should be made available to the public in accordance with the state and federal law, except for personal identifying information, which shall be deemed confidential, by posting the data on the internet website. The state agency D. State agency may continue to collect and report demographic data in the form that the data was submitted if data was collected under either of the following circumstances. So based upon the definition of ancestry defined in this section, data supposed to have been collected. No one has been collecting data based upon the definition that's defined in this section, because the word ancestry means in this section means the respondent's self-identification of the respondent's origin or descent roots, heritage, or place where the respondent or respondent's parents or ancestors were born. That means that it involves blood, not soil, but blood and soil, whether anywhere else in the world as well as over here, because that inheritance, that birthright, those roots go with you. Okay? Very, very important to understand that. And this information is open to the public. Okay? This information is open to the public. Section C says, the data collected pursuant to the provision of subsection A and B of the section should be included in every demographic report of ancestry of residents of the state of New Jersey by the state agencies published or released or after the first day of the 6 months following the effective date of this act. The data should be made available what? To the public in accordance with state and federal laws, except for personal identifying information, which should be deemed confidential by posting the data on the internet website of the state agency. So we see that the data collected that has to be associated with your parents is associated with just sanguineous, which has to do with blood, which is associated with ancestry. It's associated with ancestry, which your ancestors left what? A paper trail. Okay? They left a paper trail. So now the paper trail, based upon the new enacted legislation that does not deal with the identity as governed how they identified you back in 1790, it now has switched in our favor. My brothers and sisters, how do I know that? Let's see. Let's be a little bit more. Let's go section 6 of this section, of this title. Everyone should find this in their own state, based upon the data collection, based upon the demographics of those category groups that you see as defined. Specifically speaking and inclusively speaking, the Middle Eastern and North African people, okay? Based upon those demographics, in the data collected, the legislation has found in the state of New Jersey, and we know that government is only temporary, provisionary, based upon this founding. It finds that the legislature finds and declares that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, Middle Eastern, North African, Southern Asian, and Indian diaspora people are significant and important communities in New Jersey. Okay. Yes, in fact, these are communities in New Jersey as under the guise of residents. Okay. And that falls under the guise of naturalized citizens or those born on the soil, okay, based upon just soil, meaning that you immigrated or your ancestors immigrated here because they have nothing to do with the other category known as just sanguineous, being of the blood of those being born on the soil who was always on the soil through time immemorial. Okay? Very important. That being said, we go to this group, being that we are classified with those of Middle Eastern, North African descent, which classify as one of the classifications of other groups based upon the data that's collected associated with the demographics. This is the MENA communities in the state and on the federal level are categorized on the federal level as white people. Did you hear that? Not how they define it in 1790, based upon the Naturalization Act after the legislature intended for those founding fathers, but based upon the Census Bureau. We classify, or those of Middle East North African descent classified based upon ancestry, based upon RNA, DNA, and nuclear DNA, based upon genetics, based upon ancestry, which has to do with roots. This racial identity has not matched, once again, it has not matched the discrimination in housing, workplaces, and through daily life that many in the MENA community say they have faced. So we are crying wolf saying that we went through this, we've been discriminated on, we can't find jobs, ain't no assistance, etc. from the government. Why? Because you have not been counted. You've been counted as whites, blacks, colored people, and all the categories that existed prior to this new enactment, but yet you still remain at the bottom of the totem pole. Okay? Why is that? Okay? Why is that? It's because uh, many younger people in the MENA community often compare their experiences, meaning that the descendants of those from Middle East and North African ancestry, based upon our parents, now identify based upon that lack of knowledge of their history as those experienced by those who are now here, identified by that prior classification as black and colored people. Okay? However, with a lack of clear categorized, this paradox has been difficult to show through data. Okay? Where's the data? I'm showing you the data. Okay? It should be publicly known based upon this data. Okay? Existing state laws requires now that demographic data to be collected, which includes the communities dealing with that first group. However, the collection by the state agency is often far too general and does not incorporate a breakdown for the numerous ethnic groups within the first group. Additionally, state law does not require such a breakdown for that group associated with Middle Eastern and North Africa, as well as South Asian and Indian diaspora community. Also, this data is not made as accessible as it can be to the public. So it must be made to the public, but it's not on the public. Why? Because it's not collected. Why? Because they don't know it. Why? Because it's not being taught. Why? Because they don't want to teach it. Why? Because there's nobody else that can teach it. Elected officials, decision makers, and other stakeholders can use the information to strategically target programs for those most in need. Once again, data now being collected in 2023, which is supposed to be on the public record and can be available on the public record if it's not already on the public record, to help make the public aware, as well as the public government and those officials who work in government, which are the decision makers and which are the stakeholders, to make good decisions on your behalf by way of implementing programs that benefit you based upon the classification in which you identify with. Does that make sense to everybody who's watching me today on this platform? Okay, it's only five. That's a shame, but hey, I'll take what I can get. If you like what you're hearing, I can only get a thumbs up from one of them. One of you could only see one of you, and that's Brother McGarrett. Okay, make yourself known. Just like I'm talking, nobody's making themselves known. All right, everyone is remaining mute. Okay, this is what happens when you remain mute. All right, very important. A new federal race and ethnicity category can lead to a more equitable future for Middle Eastern Americans. Did you hear that? They ain't talking about you over in the Middle East. They're talking about you over here in America. Okay? And based upon who classified as Middle Eastern, okay, or North African. Okay? They already know who North African is because the topic is Middle Eastern. Okay? Very important. All right? It's a shame that there's only this many people who are watching this lesson. It's a shame. So they're talking about Middle Eastern, not Northern Africans. We know when we talk about Northern Africans, you're talking about Berbers. Okay? So they talking about other people getting in on this benefit. Okay? All right? This article is from 2024, July 29th, 2024. As you can see, we see the legislation dealing with the data collection of the demographic of the different groups that we've seen as made based upon the OMB, all right, Office of Management and Budget, all right, because this involves significant privileges that's going to be given to people that probably don't deserve these benefits, okay? So if you don't make yourself known, then you're not going to qualify, okay? Because we read in New Jersey, it's supposed to be known and made available to the public. What we're arguing, we already known and made known who we are as those group in society on the public record. Here's our proof. Here's our proof. We're just not making the claim. We got the legislative, statutory, uh, and common law to support who we say we are on the public record. And it says right here on the public record, based upon who we are, we are called the Third Temple English Church of England, king, heirs, and successors. To undersign each within their capacity to contract, hereby execute and acknowledge the certificate of incorporation for the purpose of the forming of a religious nonprofit in accordance with Title 16 1 1 2 and prescribed by title pursuant to 16 1 28 and 16 1 4. Okay? The name and address is where we are domiciled at the present, as well as in the kingdom of what? England. Here. Okay? Very important. So this is on the public record. Okay? It's on the public record. They're not going to put this information on the public record because they didn't know this information. They don't want to know this information because this is not the information of the data that they're collecting based upon demographics and in lieu of what they're looking to record. They want more slaves. Okay? They want to give out more credit. Okay? They don't want to restore the creditors because the only creditor is the king. Okay? Let's continue on with the lesson. A new federal race. Urban Institute. Okay? Urban Institute. It says for the past 4 years, the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized racial equity, requiring federal agencies to create equity action plans and enacting policies to bridge gaps created by long-standing inequities. However, these actions are only as effective as the data they're based on. Okay, so they're only as effective based upon the data they're based upon. Okay, and this started with, as I said, Biden and Harris. We see the effects already implemented in the state of New Jersey by the legislature. Okay, very important that we understand that. In March 2024, the Office of Management and Budget (OMB) took steps toward the more accurate and equitable future by revisiting its race and ethnicity standard to include Middle Eastern and North African as a new category on all federal government documents. Just because they're only talking about specifically about Middle East and North Africa, not the other groups. Okay? They're only talking about a new, what was the title? A new federal race and ethnicity category can lead to more equitable future in Middle Eastern Americans. Now, this topic is just dealing with Middle Eastern because they're the one who wrote the article, but it also included North Africans. So this is a competitive race, okay, based upon who can put uh, most information or the most accurate information based upon the data being collected, based upon the demographics, dealing with ancestry from a just sanguineous and not just soil standpoint. They're doing it from a just soil standpoint and not just sanguineous. We must know the difference, my brothers and sisters. So once again, exclusively talking about Middle Eastern and North Africa. And when they say Middle Eastern, they're usually talking about Arabia, okay? Arabs. We know Arabs invaded North Africa. We know that prior to the Arabs being there, that land was actually a part of the Maghreb. It's called the Maghreb. They just identify it by another name called the Mashrin. Okay? So it says in March 2024, the Office of Management and Budget OMB took steps toward a more accurate and equitable future by revisioning its race and ethnicity standard to include Middle Eastern and North Africans as a new category on all federal government documents. Before this change, difficulty collecting nationally representative data has led to the erasure of Minna American experience. So the lack of representatives based upon a representative who represent the nation, that information has been scarce. Okay, if not scarce, ain't even there. Okay, based upon Middle Eastern and North Africans. Okay, when you say Middle Eastern and you say North African, you're talking about two groups of people, two groups of societies that living in both territories at this standpoint as a result of amalgamation. Okay, so by including a new category in federal surveys and documents, policymakers can better provide the public with a clear picture speaks 1,000 words, of the number, geographic distribution, and socioeconomic situation of the MENA Americans. Not just Middle Eastern, but also North African. Okay? Not just Middle East, but North African Americans. They didn't say that at the topic. They just said Middle Eastern. In addition, this change has implications for representation in major policies, the mapping of voting districts, and resource allocations. You hear that? So as you can see, the foreigners who are born on the soil is not concerned about those who are heirs of the soil by blood. They're not concerned because if so, they would have said that in the title of this article. They didn't make that. They didn't make that clear. Do you agree with me, Brother McGowan from the House of McGowan? They should have made that clear. So they only think about themselves, and as a result, we should think about ourselves. Okay? Because ain't nobody else thinking about us. Who out there is doing this work? Who else is making these changes? Who is collecting this data in the communities in the hood? Who collecting this data? They ain't going to the hoods collecting this data. Are we gonna go do it? No. Come on. So how are we gonna be accounted amongst the race and this ethnicity standard requirement that needs to be met? Okay, specifically dealing with North African because apparently the Middle Easterns are doing their job. You know how I get down, Brother McGarrett. You know how I get down. By including this new category in the federal survey and documents, policymakers can better provide the public with a clear picture of the number, geographic distribution, and socioeconomic situation of MENA Americans. Because apparently the Middle Easterns are not doing it because they left us out in the title. Remember, we talking about property. You know what I'm saying? We talking about real estate. Who has the title to the land? Who has the rights to the government that controls the resources on the land? Who has this right? Okay, it's damn sure ain't gonna be the ones who created the category. It's the one who was there prior to the categories being created. Okay, in addition, this change had implications for representation and major policy. So, who are the representatives for the people? We don't have them in Congress. We don't have them in our local, state, municipal, federal. No representatives in reference to the classification that are now being brought in the forefront. Nobody teaches about our Middle Eastern and North African relationship based upon uh, polity or politics. Okay, and relative to the government, no one does that. Only person doing that is the Third Temple English Church of England. Why does including MENA as a new category matter? Not the other four groups, just MENA. Okay? Just MENA. Race, although based on certain physical characteristics, is a socially constructed phenomenon. Y'all better listen. As a result, the definition of racial categories have fluctuated over years. The first census in 1790 included the racial categories of whites, other free people, and slaves. So in 1790, when they created the category of whites, we were deemed as slaves. We can agree to that, right? All of a sudden now the category now changes now. Okay? As the whites are now the Middle Eastern and North Africans now, based upon the census. All right? So since then, racial categories have changed substantially. Now, 5 racial categories are represented in the federal census as white, blacks, or African Americans, American Indians, or Alaska Native American, Native Asians, and Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islanders. Now it has changed again. All of a sudden, it changed again from that. We're used to that white, black, or African. That's what we were used to. Okay? But that does not denote to any type of just soil relationship. It don't even denote to a just sanguineous relationship. Okay? Why? Because there's no demographics denoting to the ancestry in regards to ancestry denoting to a parent. This is the hell. You born on the soil. Hell, you along with everything else. Hell, corn is born on the soil. Potatoes. All right, dogs, cats, everything born on the soil. But is that their nationality? Is that their demographic origin of where they come from? These questions need to be answered. That data needs to be collected. But who is collecting the data? Okay, who is collecting the data? For decades, the OMB, all right, Office of Budget and Office of what was it called? Office of Management and Budget. So they the one who control the money. Okay, these are the one who controls the money. By including this new category in federal surveys and documents, policymakers can better provide the public with a clear picture of the number, geographic distribution, and socioeconomic situation of MENA American, meaning Middle Eastern as well as North African, not just Middle Easterns. In addition, this change has implications for representation in major policies, the mapping of voting districts, and resource allocation. Not taken away, but giving it to you, brothers and sisters. Why does including MENA as a new category matter? Race, although based on certain physical characteristics, is a socially constructed phenomenon. As a result, the definition of racial categories have fluctuated over years. The first census in 1790 included the racial categories as white, other free peoples, and slaves. Since then, it changed to racial categories such as white, black, or African American, American Indians, or Alaska Natives, Asian, and Native Hawaiian, as well as Pacific Islanders. For decades, the OMB Offices of Management and Budget has classified the MENA American, i.e., Middle East and North Africans here in America communities as white. Did you hear that? For decades. How come we didn't know that? Why didn't they give us send out a memo and let us know that we were actually classified as white people? Because based upon what we're hearing now, when we go to the census, it says, hell, 70, 80% of the people here counted amongst the population is white people. But yet you're saying these people are, according to the Office of Management and Budget, are Middle Eastern and North African. And even Middle Eastern are suspect because Middle Eastern is not closer to North Africa as North Africa is close to North America. Okay? So we got a problem with that. What does the new OMB race category mean for a MENA American community? Let's see. And it's the only group that they're talking about, I might add. By expanding the race and ethnicity categories, including the federal survey and other documentation, policymakers have already taken steps, which we see, to a more equitable future. You hear that? With this new data, policymakers at all levels, agencies, and community-based organizations will have a greater access to the following. Now, if you ain't on that public record like we have shown we are, you know what I'm saying, then you got a problem, especially if you're Negro, Black, and colored. One, a more accurate count of MENA Americans, i.e., Middle Eastern, Northern African, a more granular demographic data, okay? Distinguish. Remember, individually collected data. Differences in socioeconomic status among the MENA communities. All right, very important. This new designation will allow these stakeholders, when those stakeholders is not the owner, to better ensure their work leads to more equitable and targeted support. MENA American recognition as a distinct marginalized identity grants them legal recognition for policies that were created to protect racial minorities. Y'all don't hear me. This category will also allow medical researchers and healthcare professionals to create a representative assessment of health needs to better tailor healthcare practices for this demographic. Okay? Finally, policymakers will be able to better assess how to allocate its trillion of dollars to meet the MENA community's unique situation. Did you hear that? So everyone want to classify as MENA, even Middle Easterns that do not really classify as MENA as North Africans. Okay? Because there were groups of people living in that territory at one particular time, which at that time some people immigrated and became amalgamated with those people who were indigenous to those lands. Okay? This you must understand. Untimely, this change could lead to more equitable future for MENA Americans because of the representative data available to policymakers. Previously, other groups that have experienced the marginalization, especially Black Americans, have advocated that their communities fill out the census to ensure accurate representation and an equitable distribution of federal funding. Altogether, this new racial category could build on and further institutionalize policies focusing on racial equity and economic mobility. Public policy. Did you hear me, my brothers and sisters? All right, we got the literal, let's get the visual. Okay, we heard the literal, let's get the visual. Now we already see that the Middle Eastern representation didn't mention nothing about the North Africans in regard to that data being collected over here, not data being collected over there in the Middle East, okay, or North Africa, but the data being collected over here concerning those in the Middle East and North Africa. They left out North Africa, okay? When we're closer to uh, here to collect that data information versus them. Okay, very important. And I'm not being biased. I'm not being discriminatory. All right, I'm just showing how they are. They are being discriminatory based upon what data is being collected. Okay, when they're not even concerned about just saying green, because that was created based upon those that were emancipated from slaves, based upon what United States versus One Kim Ark said. All right. You got the Naturalization Act of 1790, the 14th Amendment for emancipated slaves, and the Immigration Act for any other person that classifies as though under those group, excluding MENA and excluding Middle East. Okay, because originally all this was inhabited by the original people, which was of North African descent. Okay, North African descent. They were identified as the Berbers. Okay, the Berbers. Let's get it.
And could you broadly speak on the impact to Middle Eastern and North African populations? I mean, that was historic. The fact that they're now being included as a category is monumental.
It is monumental, and it helps to dispel the myth because previously not being included, I believe many of these groups were forced to self-identify as a race other than what they, or ethnicity other than their own. And so it has to be very important to suddenly be visible, to be recognized, and to matter in terms of our nation's demographic data. You know, during the pandemic, over about 50% of the cases, we didn't have demographic data about race and ethnicity. And that's really not acceptable in a nation that is as prosperous as ours. And so this move to truly collect all the meaningful data and then to disaggregate it and make it available at state and local levels. This is an important positive result of our experience with the COVID pandemic.
Okay. So you heard a North African ancestors such as ours talking about how necessary it is for us to reclassify ourselves if you haven't classified yourself already, not based upon how they want to identify you or who you are, based upon your ancestry that was going back to your ancestors before you even came upon the scene. So this involves research, okay? Very important, because that inheritance follows you, okay? As you can see, they're already making preparations by way of legislative enactments here that are going to promulgate and are being distributed from the federal to the state level based upon who this social economic detailed package is meant for. Okay, very, very important for you to understand that. And there you have it from Sister Gail or Mother Gail, let you know that you must count yourself amongst this group. Okay, based upon the representation of the group. Okay, no one has done that yet. She didn't say we done that. It said we need to do that. Okay, so who has done that? Because apparently, based upon the article, Middle East and North African data that's being collected, the Middle Easterns are not concerned about that. They've never been concerned about it because as a result of the conflicts we had back in prior times, okay, about who are the original people or who will be considered the original people or what history will be told based upon the original people. And we get that everywhere we go, okay? We get that everywhere we go. All right, so there's one. Let's go to the next one. I specifically stopped it here for a specific reason. Okay, I'm gonna play from the beginning, but I stopped it here specifically because this involves the same argument of the new race and standard dealing with ethnicity and how ethnicity would be considered based upon those ethnicities who are marginalized based upon the new classification as well as the legislative intent of the new classifications based upon those who have the right to that inheritance and in lieu of what we call equitable distribution. Okay? Must understand that. So let's see what she has to say. Very important.
Efforts from the late 80s to early 90s were focused on Arab Middle East or Arab American. And it became clear back then that it's important that the category is more inclusive so that it's able to count them folks. Remember, we're talking about real estate on forms. So what was the larger check?
Let me back that up. She said, we're talking about real estate category on forms.
The part we had more difficulty with is understanding why the categories were prescribed within the standards themselves before the additional testing and research that is required to get it right was there. In second question regards to an Arab category, yes, if in my perfect world, the category would be that. But I will tell you that those efforts from the late 80s to early 90s were focused on Arab Middle East or Arab American. And it became clear back then that it's important that the category is more inclusive so that it's able to count them folks. Remember, we're talking about real estate on forms. So
Okay,
what
y'all
was
heard
the larger
that, right?
checkbox that
We're
could
talking
be there,
about
and then
real
within
estate
that,
on
that you
farms.
can then
So people
tell,
are considered real
before the
estate
additional
based upon
testing,
the
and research,
documentation that's being collected.
that is required
Okay,
to get it right was there.
one more time.
In second question regards to an Arab category,
You hear that,
yes,
Brother
if,
McGarrell?
in my perfect world, the category would be that. But I will tell you that those efforts from the late 80s to early 90s were focused on Arab Middle East or Arab American. And it became clear back then that it's important that the category is more inclusive so that it's able to count them folks. Remember, we're talking about real estate on forms. So what was the larger checkbox that could be there? And then within that you can then check it and identify by either checking the subcategory box or writing in. So from our perspective, the MENA category gets the checkbox, and then the importance of the disaggregate data that Terry was talking about arrives at making sure that you either check the category that applies to you or you write in your ethnicity or national origin, because that part is critical. If we, for example, for the Arab American Institute, if we got aggregate MENA category, that doesn't work for us. That we would need specifically to be able to capture the Arab American numbers. Otherwise, it sort of lands us at the same place of being rendered invisible in the data and not particularly helpful.
Okay. All right. So she said, real estate on forms. Okay, did you hear that, Brother McGarrell? Pronounce McGarrell. Did you hear when she said that? I'm gonna go back to the beginning of this.
Good afternoon, everybody.
She's talking about Arabs.
Welcome to our second in the series of You'll Count Me In. Nope, keep saying that. It's now You'll Count MENA In webinar series. Very excited to be hosting this conversation, and now that we have the newly released race and ethnicity standards.
Well said.
I'm delighted to be having this conversation with the group of folks assembled here today. Officially, the census experts, unofficially, data equity warriors who have literally been working fiercely on these issues for a long time, and I'm thrilled to be able to have them with us for this conversation today. I want to go ahead and just say that we're referring to the Office of Management and Budget's brand new released last month, effective as of March 28th, 2024, the new race and ethnicity standards, which have an impact on everybody. But for us as Arab Americans, this is an incredibly important and historic milestone.
So she's specifically talking about Arab Americans, okay? She's specifically speaking about Arab Americans. We read the articles specifically speaking about Middle Eastern. Nobody's speaking about North Africans, okay? The only one we've seen so far was the sister, the grandmother, the mother, okay? I ain't hearing no brothers, nothing. Nobody's talking about that from a man's standpoint for standing up for the country, but me. Okay, very important to understand that.
And that we've now gone from the 6 existing categories to a 7th minimum reporting category with the MENA checkbox, Middle East, North Africa, incredibly important. And we thought we'd convene our conversation today specifically to talk about how it impacts all of our communities, and then some very specific areas in which we believe, as wonderful as this development is, we can do better. So with that, I want to start by first going to my colleague, Mita from the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, where she is the Senior Director for Census and Data Equity. Previously, she served as the New York Immigration Coalition Census 2020 Senior Fellow, where she spearheaded the organization's efforts to ensure a fair and accurate count of New Yorkers, particularly immigrants, in the 2020 census. Mita, let me turn it over to you to kind of do some context setting.
Thank you so very much, Maya, and thank you for that introduction. And I think that introduction, I always sort of smile when I hear it because it refers to the Get Out the Count efforts of 2020. And I think in this context, it's actually particularly apt. And I will say why a bit more in a minute. So what we heard on March 28th, 2024 from the OMB is that they are revising the federal standards for the collection, maintenance, and tabulation of race and ethnicity data for federal statistical agencies. This is applicable to all federal surveys, and I say that for a reason. The headlines talk about the census. We came into this work, all of us, from the census, but this affects way more than the census. It affects what we think of as the decennial census, so the 2020 census, the 2030 census, but it also affects the American Community Survey, where we get more detailed data on our communities. It affects any survey that the federal government is conducting, but it affects states who might want to update their standards to meet the federal government, and it affects nonprofits or for-profit groups, that private sector groups that are really looking to what does the government say, thinking that the government looked at this long and hard and came up with what.
So in fact, nonprofit and for-profit groups, okay? Everyone gonna be affected by the new data that's being collected based upon the demographics of those who now are identifying as North African or Middle Eastern, okay? And all the other groups that are being data information be collected still associates with just soil, okay, versus just sanguineous, all right? Those who have the right to inherit their birthright citizenship, all right, based upon just sanguineous. Let's continue.
Categories we should be saying. So I say that just to give it that context. So what happened with this? Well, historically, and we'll use the census form because that's what everyone thinks of. There was a question at the top that said, are you of Hispanic or Latino origin, yes or no? And then there was the next question, which is, what race are you? Check all that apply. And there we had white, Black, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, and I think I did it all right. And then we had some other race, which is specific to the Census Bureau. What we saw that the OMB announced in March is that it's going to be one long question. So it's going to say, what race and or ethnicity are you? So Hispanic or Latino gets added into that long list of categories, and Middle East, North African gets added in as a new category within it. So this is very exciting, and this shows it right here. It is one long list. People can check whatever applies to them, be it a race, be it an ethnicity, be it.
So as you can see here, Asian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Asian Indian, Korean, Filipino, Japanese, Black, or African American. Is African American, Nigerian, Jamaican, Ethiopian, Haitian, Somalia, which, as we've seen in New Jersey Revised Statute 45, New Jersey Revised Statute Title 50, what was it, 52:4-7 and 6. They mentioned also Libyan, all right, Morocco, what else? A whole bunch of others, all right? Then they got Middle Eastern, Lebanese, Syrian, Iranian, Iraq, Egyptian, Israeli. They didn't even mention Moroccan. Okay, so they left out a lot of classification. Then you got white, okay, English, Italian, German, Polish, Irish, and Scottish. Okay, so it's very important to understand that these new classifications are very important to identify because even the English are identified as white. Okay, in this new classification. Very important to understand that. Why am I saying that? Let's see why. Middle Eastern. In closing, Middle East and North Africa, MENA, also referred to as West Asia and North Africa, known as WANA, or Southwestern Asia or North Africa as SWANA, is a geographic region which comprises of the Middle East, also called West Asia, and North Africa together. So the Middle East considered west of Asia and it says in North Africa together, which would be the opposite side. However, it's widely considered to be a more defined and apolitical alternative to the concept of the Greater Middle East, which comprises the bulk of the Muslim world. The region has no standardized definition and grouping and may vary, but the term typically includes countries like Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tunisia, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. It's very important to understand that because of how the people now identify themselves with these groups based upon the historical references that they use. When we go to 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica in closing, it clearly tells you right there. Tells you right here. Always run to that Encyclopedia Britannica. 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica states that this fact has been emphasized by Dr. R.T. Latham, who writes, all that is not Arabic in the Kingdom of Morocco, all that is not Arabic in French province of Algeria, all that is not Arabic in Tunis, Tripoli, and Fezzan is Berber. Okay, so if these Middle Eastern and North African countries was composed of Berbers and Arabs, and Dr. R.G. Latham is telling you that there is a difference between the Berbers and the Arabs, and we know Moors are descendants of Arabs, which are now identified as Moroccan. He said the explanation lies in the profound distinction of their characteristics. The Arab is a herdsman and a nomad. The Berber is the agriculturist and a townsman. The Arab has built his social structure on the Quran, which inculcates absolutism, aristocracy, and theocracy. The Berber, despite his nominal Mohammedanism, is a democrat, which is Jimna or Witamat, which is the government, and his Qanun or urban code called the Magna Carta of the individual liberties as opposed to the community's good. And we know Witamat or Witten was the government of the kings of Wessex. That's very important. This was the government of the kings of Wessex. All right? This goes back here. Let's see. right here. Okay. Let's see what AI got to say about it. Let's see what AI has to say about it. All right. Somebody who's not biased. Hopefully not biased. Let's ask AI. In closing. Now, once again, we know in New Jersey, in 1702 to 1776, it's His Majesty's Council. We also know in New Jersey Revised Statute 4623-2, they mention the King of England. They don't say the King of Scotland, the King of Ireland. The reason this is so is because the King of England is a domestic king. The King of Scotland or any King of Scotland is a foreign king. When the Revolutionary War took place, it was with foreign kings sitting on a domestic throne that should have been English kings. Okay? We know what United States versus Lee said, that the distort, let's read it first before I go here. So we're not being biased to the demographics, the societies based upon demographics, and the laws that govern the demographics of who these people were. Okay? We're not going to be biased, brothers and sisters. United States versus Lee, 1882, common law precedents. But little weight can be given to the decision of the English courts on the branch of the subject for two reasons. Okay? In all cases where the title to property came into controversy between the crown and a subject, whether held in right of the person who was the king or as a representative of the nation. We talk about representatives, right? Right? Based upon either the demographic information that is presented by the representatives or the demographic information that's collected by those who want to be representative. And if it ain't the original representative, much of the demographic information that's collected is going to pretty much be false. Okay? We must understand that. So it says in all cases, in regards to the title of the property, not those who living on the property by way of adverse possession or by way of eminent domain or by way of what we call escheating power. Okay, it says in all cases where the title to the property came into controversy between the crown, the English crown, as you see in New Jersey, okay, 1702 to 1776, which had nothing to do with a Scottish monarch because all those monarchs were foreign monarchs, not domestic monarchs, because the domestic monarch would have had an English paternal ancestry, okay, which we don't. So in all cases where the title of property came into controversy between the crown and the subject, whether held the right of the person who was the king or representative of the nation, the petition of the right presented a judicial remedy, a remedy which this court, on full examination in the case which required it, held to be practical and efficient. There has been therefore no necessity for suing the officer or servants of the king who held possession of such property when the issue could have been made with the king himself as a defendant. Why is this so? We go right to the revised statute. 46:3-2, governing property. Governing property. Okay? Governing property. This is legislation. Certain things on this man's land, tenements, or hereditaments of estates of inheritance at the common law held either of the King of England or other person, that means representative, or body politics, which means a representative in that body politic, which is the government, or corporate, meaning that it may be a corporation aggregate or a corporation sole. If it's aggregate, then that's not the corporation sole, which represents the crown. And at any time before July 4th, 1776. So before July 4th, 1776, when they declared their independence, the only government that was here was the King of England, who represented that personification of those other kings by way of sitting in on that throne, representing the body of politics through the incorporation by way of the certificate of incorporation, which we call a charter. Okay? We see it right here in New Jersey Revised Statute 46:3-2. It says King of England because the King of England was a domestic monarch. It had always been a domestic monarch of the King of England sitting on the throne in 1702 from time immemorial. The kings of Scottish kings were ruling over there in what they call now Scotland and now Great Britain when they decided to unify through acts of de facto legislation. Okay? They are foreign monarchs, and this is why the Revolutionary War kicked off, because they didn't want to be subject to the dictation of a foreign monarch. They couldn't go back to the original domestic monarch because they realized they knew the history of the domestic monarch, which was overthrown by the House of Stuart. How we know that? Let's look at it. It ain't like they didn't know the history. They knew the history. United States versus Lee. Apparently, we only fools that don't know it. They were talking about property. In all cases where titles of property came to controversy between the crown and the subject, whether held in the right of the person who was the king of England, as provided by the statute 46:3-2, or a representative, that means other person of the nation, the petitioner right presented a judicial remedy. Okay, that's fairness, brothers and sisters. A remedy with this court on full examination in a case which required it, held it to be practical and efficient. There has been therefore no necessity for suing the officer when an issue can be raised with the king himself as a defendant, because apparently when somebody else is occupying the throne, he can't come as the plaintiff. He has to come as the defendant because he's bringing the claim. And if you read Chisholm versus Georgia, it comes as in the name of the king, okay, and for want of office. All right. 2. Another reason of much greater weight is found in the vast differences in the essential character of the two governments as regard to the source and depository of such power. It says, notwithstanding the progress which has been made since the days of the Stuarts in stripping the crown of its powers and prerogatives, it remains true today that the monarch, not the monarchs of the Stuarts who stripped the Kingdom of England from the power of the crown, which was under the authority of the Kings of England going back to time immemorial, it remains still true today that the monarch is looked upon with too much reverence to be subject to the demands of the law as the ordinary persons are. And the king's loving nation, his people, his heirs, his descendants, would be shocked at the spectacle of their queens being turned out of the pleasures garden by a writ of ejectment against the gardener. Okay, we're talking about New Jersey because Queen Anne was not the proper gardener of the so-called garden because she was a monarch of Stuart descendants. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? If it does, please give me a thumbs up in the chat line. Okay, and I can move on with the lesson and close. All right. This competition that we're in can only be fixed as a result of those records that were kept by our ancestors, which brought about what we call today doomsday. Okay? Doomsday. The doomsday came by way of the reception statutes that were incorporated under the common law of England until the laws of the what we call provisionary government that was instituted under Title 52 of New Jersey Revised Statute for the state of New Jersey, which now temporary government or interim court now sits in what they call Trenton. Okay? Trenton. You must understand that, brothers and sisters. Let's look here. On the New Jersey Revised Statute, Title 39:3-29.3, which is an instrument governing your proof of residency as an employee of the state of New Jersey or any other state under the drivers of motor vehicle, clearly says that Title 39 here in the state of New Jersey is an identification card, which, according to the Real ID Act, clearly states upon the face of it that, what does it say? Let's see. Any document, personal information, including an applicant's photograph, obtained by the commissioners. We know the Board of Commissioners was one time called what? The Board of Freeholders. Once again, the Board of Commissioners at one time were called the Board of Freeholders. And we know that it says any document and personal information, including an applicant's photograph, obtained by the commissioner from an applicant for a standard identification card to be confidential and should not be considered a governmental record pursuant to the public record. Now, we just read, based upon the demographics as established by Title 52, which is the statute governing government in regards to the data collected governing demographics of those societies going back to the ancestry based upon just sanguineous that goes back to the parents of your mother and your father or wherever territory they were born on. But you don't have any instrument to identify you based upon the demographics of that identity of data collected based upon the ancestry, because the ID you got in your pocket is that goddamn driver license, which clearly says right here, it has nothing to do with the government as recorded based upon the public record, which they said should be based upon the public record under revised statute 47:18-1. It had nothing to do with the common law as well concerning the access to the government record and should not be disclosed by any commissioner for any purpose related to Title 8 of the United States Code, which deals with naturalized citizens on foreigners, governing the process of naturalized citizens and foreigners without the informed consent of the applicant, that means you, or a warrant signed by a state or federal judge. Apparently that warrant has been signed, or a lawful court order or a subpoena. Apparently that subpoena in court has been given, except that nothing in the section shall be construed to prohibit or any way restrict any action which such prohibition or restriction would be contrary to the federal law. Now we're seeing the contrary to the federal law or the state law by the enactment of the demographic information that now supposed to be recorded and uploaded in all states based upon the requirement as provided by statute, based upon the ancestry, based upon that data collected information going back to your mother and your father. We don't see that information presently, all right? So if they ain't gonna, where they gonna get it from if it's supposed to be given? They ain't gonna knock on the door and do an individual independent survey, okay? They're not gonna do it. They might get shot when they go to the door, especially you come and talking about this mess now, okay? Very important. But let alone, as a result of this ID that improperly identifies you by way of a pseudonym, possession of that instrument, if it's in your possession, it's a standard identification card and is issued pursuant to the section, should not be considered evidence of an individual citizenship or immigration status and should not be used as a basis for the investigation, arrest, citation, prosecution, or detention. So the data information being collected based upon the demographics of the so-called residents has nothing to do with citizenship, but residency, because it just said on the ID it had nothing to do with citizenship or foreign status such as immigration, because it was privately conducted by an agency created by such as the DMV. Okay? Such as the DMV. Brothers and sisters, y'all in a world of trouble because ain't nobody coming to your restaurant. All right. But me. Why? Because the public record. What does the public record say? In closing. (47:18-1) of the New Jersey revised statute concerning the legislation that we just read, according to Title 52. (4-7 and 6) in regard to that new data information concerning the demographics of Middle Eastern and Northern African ancestry that has to do with your roots, okay? That information must be now reported on the public record. And it said that the legislation finds and declares pursuant to Title 52:4-7 and 6 that under 47:1A, which is the legislation governing the public record, it says that the government records should be readily accessible for inspection, copying, or examination by the citizens of the state. So if you got that ID in your pocket and it clearly says it had nothing to do with immigration status as a citizen here in North America because it's not construed to Title VIII. And that's the only way you can be construed to citizenship on the federal level as well as the state level. So you need that demographic information to be uploaded by those agencies. Okay. So if they're not gonna put it up there, you got to do it yourself. So and we have done that as I showed you. Okay. Says the government records should be readily accessible for inspection, copying, or examination by citizens of the state, not residents, because they are not citizens, but to certain exceptions for the protection of the public interest and any limitation on the right of access accorded by the public record under 47:1A-1. It also states that in closing, okay, in closing, all government records should be subject to the public access unless exempt from such access, as amended and supplemented in any other statute, resolution, and either of both houses of legislative regulation promulgated under the authority of any statute, executive order, and you see all these executive orders being implemented without the act of legislation, but under the authority of the executive power of the government, which is only what you call a head of state, okay? Because he said even his executive orders of him or the governor or executive orders from the governor, rules of the court, or any federal law, federal regulation, or federal order, a public agency such as the Bureau of Biostatistics, such as the Fair Credit Reporting Agency, DMV, all of them. Any public agency has a responsibility and an obligation to safeguard from the public access. This talking about consumer rights, consumer privacy, and competition rights of that citizens' information that's on the public record, and which is personal, which will be entrusted, that they have been entrusted based upon that disclosure to them, that they are obligated to protect that privacy right, which would be reasonably expected by you based upon you putting the information on the record via yourself. All right. So guess what? If you didn't put the information up there, it's not going to be protected based upon privacy rights, based upon the reasonable expectation of your right as privacy, because you are private property to them. Okay. You are private property to them. Okay. And with that being said, I think I covered everything. Let's see. So this is a competition, brothers and sisters. This is a competition. Let's see. All right. I think I had to long enough. Any questions from anybody in the chat line? Are there any questions? Any questions? Oh, yeah, I know where I want to go. Right here. Before I close out, let's go here. This is what AI has to say about New Jersey Revised Statute 46:3-2. New Jersey Revised Statute 46:3-2, based upon what AI say, concerns certain tenures and holdings mentioned the King of England because it refers to land ownership and tenures that existed before the American Revolution when New Jersey was a British colony. So the conflict with New Jersey, the colonies wasn't with England or the King of England, it was the British kings or queens sitting on the English crown. That was the problem, okay? We must understand. And those kings were foreign kings and not domestic kings. How? Let's get a little more detail. The statute addresses the land ownership, Title 46, we just read. It says King of England specifically, not British kings. That the date Declaration of Independence of July 4th, 1776 will remain in what? Free and common soakage, okay? Which means that they got to pay rent. The tenures and holdings. The statute deals with the tenures of honors, manual lands, tenements, or the hereditaments, or the estate of inheritance at the common law, held either by the King of England, body politic, person, or corporate. Okay? That's what the whole statute states in its entirety. Okay? You must know that if you got somebody some type of inheritance that the king has. Okay. Transition to freehold. The statutes specify that these types of holdings that was originally under the king, under the protection of the king, as corporations sold under what we call crown land, because crown land, the king personified the crown. And it is inseparable. It says the statute specifies that these types of holdings, which were previously held under the king, are now to be held in free and common soakers under the king. But if the king ain't there, then who the hell got the common soakers? It is the state. Discharge of tenures. The statute stated that these holdings are to be discharged of the tenures, charges, and incidents based upon the finger tenures that were created by William the Conqueror. But they have not stopped. Why? Because the same practice that William the Conqueror brought on was the same practice that were inherited by what? Rome. How we know it? Let's see if AI qualifies that. Fiddle tenures, as established by the statute. All right? AI. This is not me. So it ain't biased. Thank you very much for the compliment. Fiddle tenures. Let's see where we're at. This is what AI said. This is ancestral intelligence that we're looking to. AI. Fiddle tenures, the system where land ownership was tied to obligation of services. Wasn't created. So. Okay. Fiddle tenures. This is what AI said. Fiddle tenures, the system where land ownership was tied to obligation of services, wasn't created by a single individual, but evolved from roaming barbarians. Did you hear that? Evolved from Roman barbarians in the Carolingian institution with the Norman conquest in England in 1066, solidifying its structure. I repeat, feudal tenure, the system where land ownership was tied to obligations of services, wasn't created by a single individual, i.e. William the Conqueror, but evolved from Roman barbarians in the Carolingian institution with the Norman conquest in England in 1066, solidifying Eastern structure. So we can fully conclude that William the Conqueror was in fact a Roman barbarian, right? Here's a more detailed explanation. Roots in Roman and barbarian practices. Feudalism includes the concept of land tenure, had its roots in the Roman manorial system and barbarian war chiefdom, where land was granted to soldiers and office holders in exchange for loyalty and services. The Carolingian influenced kings like Charlemagne further developed these practices, granting land as benefits to loyal noblemen in return for military services. So we're talking about Charlemagne, Carolingians, which are descended from the Merovingians, which never descended down from God because they all descended down from Clovis I. And Clovis I, the founder of the Merovingians, said they never descended down from God like the Anglo-Saxons. Okay, so we can disqualify that claim. The Carolingian kings like Charlemagne further developed these practices, granting land as benefits to loyal nobles in return for military services. The Norman conquest and feudalism in England. The Norman conquest in England in 1066 led to the establishment of a highly structural feudal system, with William the Conqueror declaring himself the sole allodial owner of the entire realm. Now, according to New Jersey Revised Statute 46-3-6, it says that the land remains allodial, and under that same statute, it says the King of England. It don't say William the Conqueror. It says the King of England, and William the Conqueror was no King of England. Okay, king is an obligation. Under the system, land was held to the king and all landowners from barons to knights were obligated to provide services to their lords, including military services. You call it tenant-in-chief. All right. Development and subfeudation. This is why praetorians were put in place by who? Edward I, son of Henry III, son of John, son of Godfrey V, Count of Anjou, son of Fulk, ruler of Jerusalem. Development of subfeudation is a tenant-in-chief which could further grant land unlawfully to their own followers, creating a hierarchy of lords and vassals, process known as subfeudation. All right, let's get to it. So as a result of that, we're here. The Pacific New Jersey statute, according to what AI says under revised statute 46-2, regarding tenures of land, remains part of New Jersey revised statute, but its original applicability to the King of England or the United Kingdom is no longer relevant due to New Jersey's independence and establishment of their republic. Their republic, which was established, was now based upon their independence from the Kingdom of England. It was based upon the independence from England as a result of the Scottish monarch sitting on it, which makes the monarch sitting on it a foreign monarch, because the statute requires a domestic monarch, just as a monarch from the Kingdom of England. And the only way that can happen is one being born on the soil and one by blood. Okay? Being born on the soil and one by blood. Let's go a little further. Okay. I'm going to close out on this. Historically, we already talked about this, but we're going to close out on it. Historically, Middle Eastern and North African, as we've seen, as provided by New Jersey Revised Statute 52:4-7 and 6 of New Jersey Revised Statute, which was mandated by New Jersey legislation enactment by Congress, which was implemented on behalf of the federal government in regards to the new classification as established by the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. Okay, because that budget that they're managing is the budget that is the allocation of funds that is yet to be distributed to the true heirs. Okay, historically, Middle Eastern and the African, North African, i.e. MENA communities in the U.S., including those in New Jersey and on the federal level, have been categorized as what? White by the government, though many within the MENA community do not identify as such. All right? Historical categorization. For decades, the United States government, specifically the Office of Management and Budget, had classified people with the origins in Middle Eastern or North Africa, so it's either or. Who's going to take the position of classifying based upon how the budget of the management and officers who manage the budget in regards to the allocation of funds, in regards to those who are going to classify as white people, because they excluded those people as white people in reference to the Naturalization Act of 1790, because that was based upon the color of skin and not the ethnicity or genealogy. We need to make sure we understand what's going on. Now, the data information that was collected based upon demographics at that particular time was only associated with those people at that particular time associated with the Caucasus Mountains. They had no North African or no Middle Eastern in their head when they created that legislation called 1790 Naturalization Act. All right, very important. Census and other data. This categorization has been used in the United States Census and other government surveys, leading to the MENA communities being statistically invisible and underrepresented. I wonder why, because ain't no king speaking as representative, i.e. province patriarch. All that is about to come to an end. Why? Let's see. Lack of representation. The current system does not allow for the collection of data that accurately reflects the diverse experience in these MENA communities if there is what? A lack of representation. What is representation? Somebody speak on your behalf. Who speak on behalf of the black people? Nobody. Who speak on behalf of the Negroes? Nobody. If they did, they're doing a badass job of it. Why? Because we're still at economically, socially, religiously, politically at the bottom of the food chain. Okay? Very important. Where is the representation? Where is the advocacy? Okay? Where is all these things needed? All right? In regards to the new standard. The new standard. All right? So in order for us to meet the new standard, we must have representatives or a representation. Okay? The only way that representation can be met here in North America based upon the identity of those Middle Eastern or North African, which based upon the definition of North African would be those of the Maghreb, and that will be Berbers, okay? Versus those of the Arabia, which will be Arabs. And we know what Imre Amar has said, that those Arabs were not considered citizens under the United States Act of 1790, nor could they be citizens under the data collected based upon the information that's being collected based upon the new groups, based upon ancestry dealing with just soil and just sanguineous. Because we know through the Arab invasion of the Maghreb, which was inhabited by the original people based upon just sanguineous and not just soil, those immigrating to the soil and being there for a particular or a certain amount of time have now acquired the status as citizen. We're not talking about that. We're talking about those who are originally classified as the original people of the Middle Eastern and North African demographics data collected or that has not been collected going back to time immemorial. And when I say that, I mean time out of mind. Let's see what AI has to say about it. In closing. AI says, yes, the Berber people, also known as the Amazigh. Now we got to watch that because Berber is the English word for saying Berber, and Amazigh is the Arabic word for saying Berber. Okay, but yet alone they're using English letters, so we got came through the baby out with the bathwater. It says yes, the Berber people, also known as the Amazigh or Amazigh. Why? Because they're over there now in North Africa and not over here. Because why? All the Berber who is originally of North Africa have immigrated or migrated or was always here. Okay. So it says, yes, the Berber people, also known as the Amazigh or Amazigh, are considered an indigenous ethnic group of Maghreb region in North Africa, which falls under the broader MENA, Middle East, or North Africa region. Did you hear that? If you didn't, let's get a little bit more specific and close. Right? So it says, yes, Berber of Middle East and North Africa does qualify as the group category 3 in New Jersey's legislation enactment 52:4-6 and 7. All right, which we didn't have to wait for them to upload that data. We already did it because it's filed by the public record. We are called Anglo-Saxon Berbers. He says, here's a more detailed explanation. To determine who are the original people of North African and Middle Eastern people. It says the Berber people are the indigenous inhabitants of North Africa, predating the arrival of the Arabs in the Maghreb. Did you hear that? This is based upon what? Geographics, which entails demographics, because hell, why would you care about an area if ain't nobody there? Okay? So geographic location, they say, according to what AI say, and we say AI means ancestral intelligence. So if you understand it, you got to have the intelligence of your ancestors. They are primarily found in countries like Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and Libya, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? I didn't say that. It also said the language of the Berber people speak Berber languages, which belong to what? The Afro-Asiatic language of families. That being said, we close out on the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica about those people identified as Arabs in those particular territories that was originally inhabited by Berbers. Okay? And the last one, MENA, in context. The Maghreb region where the Berbers are located is part of the broader MENA region, which now encompasses what? The Middle East and North Africa. I repeat. The Maghreb region where the Berbers are located, it didn't say Berbers in Arabs, it didn't say Berbers in Morocco, it didn't say Berbers in American, it said Berbers are located as part of what they call MENA, which means Middle Eastern and Northern Africa. Why? Because even though they have cultural diversities, the ethnicity still remains the same. Right? The MENA region is known for its diverse culture, including the Berbers, Arabs, Kurds, Turks, Persians, and other indigenous people as a result of immigration, migration, conquest, discovery, whatever the name you choose to put on it or spin. Hey, it's still the same thing. All right? And like I said, when you're dealing with feudalism and barbarianism, which goes back to Rome and William the Conqueror, all that had to be fixed by Alfred the Great, which was the king of Wessex, or the king of Witten, or the king of Wittemont, which was the government of the Berbers as established by the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica. All right? And it took Alfred the Great, which means wise elf, okay, and he definitely was wise because he was part of the wise council called Wittemont. Okay, so we close out here. The barbarian kingdom was stated founded by various non-Roman, primarily Germanic people in Western Europe and Northern Africa. So Western Europe and North Africa following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. The barbarian kingdom was the principal government in Western Europe in early medieval ages. The time of the barbarian kingdom is considered to have come to an end with Charlemagne. We're talking about Charlemagne, you're going back to those Romans who inherited history from the Carolingians, which Charlemagne was, and then that passed on to what they call your Frankish kings, all right? But it says, in spite of all that, a handful of smaller Anglo-Saxon kingdoms persisted until being unified by who? Alfred the Great, one of the great kings of Britain, prior to that calling Britain or Britonia. Okay, very very important. And not talking about over there, we're talking about over here, but we're talking about the distribution of the barbarian kingdoms in 1491, which was done by the Spanish Empire by Roman Catholic Spaniards going back to Queen Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand III of Aragon, which was warring with the original inhabitants of Castile in England as a result of the other conflicts that we talked about, which for the sake of time I'm not going to go through. We see the distribution of the barbarous tribes, which were unified by Alfred the Great in 886. All of a sudden now, we're being distributed all over again. Okay? We're being redistributed all over again. Why? Because we lost the history, the identity, the custom of the laws that were here prior to that confusion. And that was the common law of England. Okay? We must understand that. And that being said, we must go back to the original graph, which takes me here. Yeah. Right? This was all our land. Spain, French, and British. All right? When you say British, British goes back to Britain. All right? And Britain goes back to the ancient Britons before it was overthrown by those Scottish kings who are now immigrated to go to Britain, do what they call the Scottish diaspora, and which brought forth what they call the Scottish Enlightenment. And that Enlightenment was not to Enlightenment because the Enlightenment of that world was still under the influence of English by Edward I, by way of the Scottish independence, which was in 1296. Okay, So with that, I stop and share my screen. And I hope that each and every one understand how important this lesson is. Whether you like it or not, you must understand history, because without it, you don't exist. So with that, I'm going to greet you as I always greeted you, and that's in peace and love. Peace.